So I probably don't need to go into this slide because of the previous talks, but I will because I made the slide. So gold is currently trading at near all record highs, and as you can see from this graph on the left, it's had a sharp rise post-2020. We won't talk about what's happening now. Now, what does this mean for historic projects? Well, many of these were closed or paused years ago when the gold prices were much lower, but they still hold value. So often they have remaining resources, solid exploration data sets, and even existing infrastructure like haul roads, pits or camp facilities. So that means lower restart costs, less time spent on greenfields permitting, and fewer surprises during development. So with so much groundwork already in place, these projects can be brought back online relatively quickly. So this is ideal for investors seeking quicker returns. So across Australia, on the top right, you can see a lot of these projects are being reactivated in mining provinces like West Australia and Queensland. So these locations benefit from mature infrastructure, a skilled workforce, and supporting mining policies. We've also seen a pickup in exploration expenditure, especially in gold post-2015, which is that bottom right graph. So compare this with other commodities, gold remains one of the highest investment targets. So with high gold prices combined with the advantages of dormant but well-documented projects, they're creating real opportunities for rapid redevelopment and value creation. So this slide just highlights some of the examples of historic gold projects in WA that are either actively being mined again or undergoing revival efforts. So the ones on the left are the ones that have restarted projects. So we've got Coolgardie gold operations. They were restarted in 2023. Edna May operations, they chose a different sort of tactic, and they're focusing on hauling and processing stockpiles. So it's a sufficient way to generate cash flow using existing resources. King of the Hills gold mine commenced underground mining in 2022, and everyone knows about Bellevue gold mine, but they have a strong focus on high-grade underground operations. So the ones on the right are the ones that are currently undergoing revitalisation. So we've got Bullabulling, so that was acquired in early 2025. The company I think they currently have 6 drill rigs out there, drilling 80,000 metres. Vivian project was acquired in 2024, and Gorilla Gold put out an inferred MRE resource in early 2025. So Wiluna Gold Mine is not fully operational. It is actively processing tailings and oxide ore, and they're going to resume full-scale mining operations shortly. And finally, we've got Mount Palmer Gold Mine. They've completed air core drilling on the tailings and have started RC drilling across several high-grade targets. So these projects show a clear pattern. Companies are re-evaluating historic assets and taking diverse paths: stockpile processing, exploration, underground, re-entry or full mine restarts. So this slide outlines why historic gold projects are often strategic and cost-effective than starting from scratch. First, we have existing infrastructure. Many of these projects already have haul roads, camps, power lines, or at least remnants that can be refurbished. This significantly reduces the capital expenditure. It also means a faster path to production, since much of the groundwork is already done. They also have a wealth of legacy data. So there's decades of drilling, assays, geophysical surveys and mining records. This information helps refine geological models, increases confidence in the resource and ultimately de-risks exploration. Lastly, these areas have a history of mining, so local communities tend to be more familiar and sometimes even supportive of renewed operations. So revisiting old projects is a smart strategy to help reduce cost, accelerate timelines and reduce permitting or social hurdles. So I thought I'd take you through the timeline of exploration practices. So before the 1950s, exploration was largely manual and non-standardised. So there was handwritten assay logs with a norm, there was poor location control, no QAQC, and incomplete sampling coverage. There's usually no downhole surveys. So this data we rarely use. It's often used for geological modelling, but not in the resource. So from 1950s to 1970s, we begin to see more structured drilling practices. We got percussion and early diamond drilling became more common, although the logging standards were still limited. Reverse circulation drilling gained traction and some basic logging templates were introduced. Variable sampling intervals, inconsistent record keeping, and still no QAQC. So we often exclude this data, but can inform exploration targeting. By the 1980s, RC drilling had become widespread, and diamond drilling quality improved, particularly with HQ and NQ core sizes. So logging practices also improved with early templates. There was limited QAQC with rare duplicates, but still no standards. Collar surveys were sometimes unreliable, and downhole surveys were not universal. So some of these data sets can be used with caution, but they often require twin drilling to validate. So the 1990s marked the start of a data standardisation. So RC and diamond drilling were now the main methods. Basic QAQC protocols were introduced, things like lab repeats, occasional blanks and standards. We also saw the beginning of digital data management, however in very basic forms. Analytical labs vary in quality and collar accuracy was improving. So this data was frequently usable with verification. By the 2000s, we entered the modern era of exploration. So there was advanced QAQC protocols were adopted, including blanks, duplicates and standards. Although there were still occasional gaps as this was a transition period for many companies. Systematic logging became standard practice and collar positioning began using DTPS. At this stage, there was fully digital databases became the norm. So this data is often accepted with limited validation, but might require some database auditing. So in recent years, exploration has reached a much higher level of rigour. So that we have comprehensive QAQC. Downhole gyros are used to improve downhole drill accuracy. All data systems are auditable. So we have a high confidence in this data and they're readily included in mineral resource estimates. So when revisiting historic projects, it's crucial to understand when the data was collected because the decade of origin has a direct impact on the reliability and accuracy and the level of rework needed. So this slide just goes through the broad spectrum of data types we work with. Obviously, the biggest one, as you can see with this picture here, which is a revitalising project, is the drill hole data. So this is the foundation of any resource project, and it provides insights into grade, geology, and continuity. So legacy drill hole databases are often the first thing we assess. Oops. So this can include downhole surveys, collar coordinates, density data, lithology logs, alteration, mineralisation, assay results and QAQC. So geological mapping, this is surface and underground maps. They help frame the structure and geological context. Older projects may have high quality mapping, but often in analogue form. So when we talk about sampling data, we're talking about chip, grab, soil, stream, and channel samples. So it's important for understanding the surface expression and verifying historic mineralisation footprints. For survey and topography, so the modern projects now require terrain models or accurate terrain models and colour locations and elevation control. Older projects might lack this digital survey, so this is a common area of rework. Then we get to my part, which is the resource models. These often need revalidation. So legacy models can still be useful if underpinned by reliable drilling and QAQC data. We often overlook geophysical and geochemical data, but powerful for targeting. Historic geophysics can sometimes be reprocessed with modern technologies. Environmental and geotechnical, it's important for feasibility and permitting. So historic data might include test pits, hydrology or geotechnical logs. Mining and production records, where available, these offer real production benchmarks, so such as actual recoveries, costs and reconciliation, which can inform future plans. Reports and documentation, these can include internal reports, studies and field notes. So they're often a goldmine of context that helps explain decisions made in the past. And finally, we've got the data formats and systems. Legacy data might exist in paper logs, scanned PDFs or Excel spreadsheets. So one key early task is digitising and validating this data into usable formats. So when we talk about historic data, it's not just about old drill holes, it's an entire ecosystem of datasets. The better we understand what exists, its quality and what's missing, the faster we can move a project forward. So this slide goes through the common data issues we see with old legacy datasets. So our biggest issue is data quality and integrity. So this is often our biggest concern. We see missing metadata, things like units, coordinates or even dates. QAQC may have been minimal or non-existent. Digitisation errors are also common, especially where data was transcribed from paper to spreadsheets. So then we have incomplete or fragmented records. So key elements like drill holes, assays or geological logs may be missing. Production records like tonnes grade recoveries are often only partially preserved. We also see disjointed model documentation, especially when projects are passed between owners. And data may be scattered across paper, Excel and databases. So then we have interpretation bias or legacy assumptions. This one is more subtle but equally as important. Older interpretations often reflect outdated geological models or conceptual thinking. You'll find subjective domain boundaries drawn manually or based on limited data, and cut-off grades or economic assumptions may be unclear or undocumented. So when we talk about spatial inaccuracies, these issues directly affect location and 3D modelling. Older survey methods are far less precise than today's DGPS. Collar locations or elevations may be incorrect or missing, and downhole deviation data may not have been captured. And coordinate systems can be ambiguous, especially when local grids were used. This can become a compliance and reporting issue. Legacy resources may not meet the current codes. Some resources were never classified in terms of confidence levels, and often there's no audit trail or independent verification. Finally, we have compatibility issues. So legacy files may be stored in obsolete formats like DAT, Lotus or DOS-based modelling systems. They might be on old media like CDs, floppies, that are now unreadable. Or we may find custom scripts or macros with no documentation, making them difficult to trust or reproduce. So while historic data can offer a huge head start, we need to carefully assess these common issues. Identifying and mitigating these risks is essential before any reinterpretation, modelling or decision making can take place. So I'm over halfway, so I thought I'd put something interesting in there. More interesting than what I've been talking about. So I feel like this image kind of depicts my clients who are the ones yelling, "I'm rich," and me thinking, "Oh my gosh." But this slide takes a step further, looking not just at the types of data issues, but the risks they create if not identified and managed. So first up is our sampling risk. Unknown or undocumented methods are common, so there might be some visible mineralisation bias. These may introduce grade bias or false continuity into models. Location errors can destroy spatial confidence, so incorrect geometry, volume estimation errors or misaligned domains. The analytical risk is the unknown or inconsistent preparation methods. This can introduce variability and cause inaccurate grades and poor precision. And one of my big things is the QAQC risk. This is a high concern with legacy data. Generally, there are no standard blanks or duplicates, so you cannot validate accuracy or precision. This weakens our confidence in the results. The data integrity risk, this is about human error with transcription errors or missing records that leads to gaps in data continuity. Unreliable geological modelling. And then we have temporal risks. Over time, mining methods, reporting codes and standard evolves. This means we're mixing data sets with incompatible confidence levels. The bias risk, this speaks to the intentional or unintentional filtering of results. So this can lead to over-optimistic interpretations, inflated grade models, poor reconciliation and production stage. And finally, documentation risk. With the lack of original records, we cannot verify or audit data. So while old data can unlock real value, we have to go in with our eyes open. If we ignore these risks, we may be building our project on a very shaky foundation. So no matter how exciting the numbers look at first glance. So I feel this picture is probably a bit too familiar for some of us. It's that moment when someone says, the data's all there, you just need to load it. And then you start digging and you realise there's 50 different folders, there's 20 different formats spread across spreadsheets, PDFs, scan logs and folders. My favourite is when you get one of these that say final model. Doesn't tell you where from or what time, but it just says final model. So that's why data audits are not just helpful, they're essential, especially when dealing with historic or inherited data sets. So how do we begin the audit? We begin by compiling everything, every drill hole file, map, assay report, spreadsheet, database export and backup archive. This step is about knowing what you have and just as importantly what you don't have. Next we assess the completeness. Are we missing fields or metadata? Are some records partial? Do we have collars but no assays or lithology but no coordinates? This step includes checking for inconsistencies and understanding the historical context about the data collection. And the thing we need to remember about data lineage is that data doesn't exist in a vacuum. It was created by people for specific purposes. So we look at who created it, when, under what conditions and why. Understanding the lineage helps us determine intent and assess reliability. Also, who collected the data? Was it a Tier 1 mining company and when was it? Finally, we don't need to revalidate everything because that's often unrealistic. Instead, we focus on the most critical data sets, like those feeding into a resource model or public reporting, and those that have unclear origins or gaps. So this approach makes the best use of time and budget while reducing overall risk. The one thing I can say is take time to audit your data properly. Like, what is your end goal? Are you happy with an inferred resource, or do you want to get to an indicated resource? So this audit process is how we turn a room full of boxes into a reliable, structured foundation for decision making. It's the first step in transforming historic data into a usable, defendable asset. So now I've talked about the risks and audit process. This slide walks us through how to validate different types of historical data and what we're watching out for in each case. So each data type plays a distinct role in resource estimation. So our validation needs to be specific and targeted. So when we talk about drill hole data, we're going to do twin drilling. We're going to try and resurvey collars, validate assay methods and re-assay pulps. For underground sampling, this is a bit harder. We want to compare it to underground plans, confirm mapping, if possible, resample accessible areas, and finally reconcile to production. For surface sampling, we need to try and verify the locations, which is usually extremely difficult. Duplicate sampling, but you should use this cautiously in an MRE. The same with production data. It can be skewed by recovery bias or poor reconciliation practices, especially if mine volumes or grades weren't tracked accurately. This again is very hard to validate. Geological mapping and logs. It's easy just to go back and relog the drill core if it still exists and reconcile with modern mapping. For geophysics, you can sometimes reprocess the data, or we can go out there and just start drilling. For assay, you can review original certificates if they exist, but assess the lab quality. Which lab was it that did all the work? Are they still operating today? And re-assay if any material exists. For the database, a full database audit, so verify against original records. So validating historic data isn't about ticking a box. It's about asking what role this data plays and what risk it carries. Only then can we decide what can be relied on and what needs rework and where new data needs to be acquired. So this slide summarises the 7 critical steps you should follow. So initially, it's the data collection and inventory. So gather all available historic data, drilling, sampling, mining, geology, geophysics reports, catalogue the data sources, vintages and completeness, and identify missing or uncertain data sets early. We then move into the data review and triage. So assess the data quality, sampling methods, location control, assay procedures, and the QAQC. At this stage, you usually classify your data into potentially usable, requires verification, or is likely to be unusable. We then would move on to creating validation programs. So plan and conduct twin drilling programs on key historic holes. Resample available core, pulps, rejects, or accessible underground faces. Verify collar locations with modern survey equipment and if you do any validation drilling, make sure you apply modern QAQC procedures. This then leads into database reconstruction. So digitise original data, logs, maps, certificates carefully. Conduct detailed database audits to identify errors, omissions and inconsistencies. Build a validated, fully traceable modern database. Then we move on to geological modelling. Use this validated data to build preliminary geological models. Use historic data for geology definition, but apply caution when you're using it for grade estimation. Then we move into the mineral resource estimation. If you're wanting to have a high classification, include only validated data sets into your MRE. If you're not worried about classification, then obviously you can just use the data you've got. But apply appropriate classification reflecting your data confidence. And use historic production as a cross-check and not a substitute for validation. One of the most important part is reporting. Clearly disclose sources and validation steps in technical reports. So you need to provide the rationale for inclusion or exclusion of historic data sets and ensure compliance with current reporting codes. So this framework ensures that historic data becomes an asset, not a liability. It also gives stakeholders and investors confidence in your technical approach to resource estimation. But what happens when you can't use the data, when it doesn't meet modern standards? In fact, historic data can still provide significant value across the broader project lifecycle. For your geological interpretation, you can still use the legacy drill logs and mapping, even though they are too inconsistent for resource modelling. This will help us understand lithology, structure and domains. For exploration targets, historic anomalies, drill traces and early prospecting records can give follow-up drilling and expansion. For your mining methodology, if the deposit was mined before, the legacy data provides insight into what worked and what didn't. So this includes mining techniques, dilution issues and recovery problems that may guide your current plans. So for grade reconciliation, even approximate production records allow us to compare past mine grades and resource models with resource models. So this helps us spot any areas of under or overestimation. And finally, for community and stakeholder engagement, obviously mining histories can demonstrate a long-standing relationship with the community. This is useful when rebuilding trust, responding to concerns or negotiating land access. So even if the data can't go into a resource model, it can still shape your exploration strategy, engineering decisions and stakeholder narrative. So legacy data used wisely remains an incredibly powerful tool. So to wrap things up, here are 4 case studies that show how different companies have approached the challenges and opportunities of historic data. These examples cover a range of strategies, what data was used, what had to be excluded, how validation was handled and what outcomes were achieved. So for the top one, for Bellevue Gold, So they verified the 1970s to 1990s underground data using twin drilling, resampling and modern QAQC. They ended up excluding pre-1980s percussion drilling, and this resulted in a greater than 3 million ounce high-grade resource. For Davyhurst, they used drilling and production data from the 1980s to 2000s. They validated with infill drilling and reconciliation. They ended up excluding pre-1985 data with poor collars, and they've achieved multiple JORC 2012 resources and have restarted mining. Penny West, they validated the high-grade 1990s RC drilling with modern RC and diamond programs. They ended up excluding unverified intervals. They achieved expanding the resource, and then they sold it to Ramelius. So for Wiluna, the historic data from 1930s to 2000 was validated via database rebuild, relogging and drilling. They excluded underground sampling and with poor control. They ended up defining a large sulphide resource with a staged development plan. So these case studies show that even complex, messy legacy data sets can become valuable strategic assets if you apply the right mix of validation, exclusion and transparency. So I think this image captures a lot of what we're feeling right now, that historic gold projects that were abandoned decades ago are suddenly looking more viable again. Not because they've changed, but because the economics have. So this slide wraps up the key lessons when working with historic data. Whether you're reviving a mine, acquiring a brownfields project, or just trying to interpret legacy drilling, these principles can help you extract value while managing risk. So the big thing is take time to collate and assess legacy data. Don't rush. There's often value in old logbooks, scanned PDFs, even handwritten notes. So understand what exists before making assumptions. Plan a verification strategy based on data confidence. So focus efforts where confidence is lowest. Twin drilling, collar resurveys, QAQC checks. But be strategic with time and budget. Classify resources cautiously. So historic data might support inferred classification, but don't force it into indicated without verification. Historic data is a guide, not a gospel. It can inform geology and targeting, but always confirm with modern methods. Also, embrace modern tools. Use today's technology, 3D modelling, scripting, geostatistics to reproduce and reinterpret historic data sets. Engage experts early. Getting a geologist, data manager or consultant involved early can catch issues before they become expensive mistakes. But the big thing is historic projects can thrive. With structured validation, even 30 to 50-year-old data sets can become the basis for a new resource, a feasibility study or even a production restart. So the message is, don't dismiss historic data, respect it, challenge it and above all verify it. Because in the right conditions, even long dormant projects can come roaring back to life. Thank you.